Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Annika Fairwild and today I'll be talking you through my February media wrap-up. One of my main New Year's resolutions was to do one of these for every month, as well as upload more regularly, which I've been trying to do. It gives me kind of an outlet to verbalise my thoughts and feelings about various pieces of media. It kind of honours that artwork. It allows me to take some time out of my day to prompt myself to reflect. And also I love to give recommendations. I don't always recommend everything that I've consumed. Sometimes I won't end up liking something, who knows? Following categories are books, films, TV shows, podcasts, and then specific YouTube channels, and also specifically informational YouTube videos or video essays. So let's start with books. My first book, I actually don't have a physical copy of it because I read it in a PDF. I'm part of a university, which means I get access to PDFs for free, and a ton of them, so I love just downloading them. I love downloading PDFs. No one can stop me from getting my hands on a little PDF, my dirty grubby little rat hands. I read A Manual of Sex Magic by Lewis T. Culling. It's around 150 pages long. It was okay, you know. I found that it had a lot of emphasis on straight sex, although I think the principles could maybe be adapted, but you know, it was written in the 70s, I believe. It talks of the author's experiences in the 30s, I believe. Don't quote me on that. So I suppose it makes sense, I guess, but if you find yourself wanting to read this for practical advice as opposed to just for the love of the game like me, I think this appeals to a very specific demographic, that being straight people. There's a lot of emphasis on the whole masculine, feminine, like binary aspect of witchcraft, I suppose, or ritual as well. I am also just generally interested in sexuality as like an abstract concept. I read a really interesting book about the history of the fetish. I'll put it up here because I forgot the name of it. And generally I found that a lot of my favourite pieces of media have very psychosexual themes. So I just found it interesting as well, considering that I'm also interested in the occult. The next book is a poetry collection by Matsuo Basho. It's called Lives Too Chilled. It is a collection of haikus. The blurb reads, Japan's celebrated Buddhist poet balances the smallness of humanity with nature's epic drama in these magical 17th century haikus. This is part of the Penguin Mini Classics box set, or the Mini Classics series. If you don't know, these are all about 50 pages long. They're quite small as well. I bought myself the box set when I was 18, which was 3 years ago, and I'm only making my way through them now. And so if I don't have the energy really, or the motivation to read one of my bigger books, I suppose, I will pick up one of these for the day and read through that. Considering that these are haikus as well, you know, there's not much on the page, you can see, so I read this in one sitting. Haikus are really interesting because they're an exercise in moderation and kind of discipline, and how to create something striking with so few syllables. So for instance, spring rain under trees, a crystal stream, and then also like monk's feet clumping through icy dark, drawing sweet water. If you're interested in this kind of very minimal poetry, or if you're just wanting to delve into haikus, I definitely recommend it. It's short, it's snappy, and it's really well done. I definitely recommend picking it up. It's very cheap. It's meant to be £2. That's what the back says anyway, but inflation's going crazy. Then I went to Germany to visit my family, and I decided that instead of bringing a new book with me, I would bring a book that I had read halfway through 2 years ago before I fell into a very bad reading slump. That book is The Woman in the Dunes by Kobo Abe. Now, Kobo Abe is actually one of my favourite authors. This is actually his most famous work, I'm pretty sure, but my favourite by him is The Face of Another. I believe both of those already have movie adaptations that are quite well regarded as well. The blurb reads, Nikki Junpei, an insect enthusiast, searches the scorching desert for beetles. As night falls, he is forced to seek shelter in an eerie village, half buried by huge sand dunes. He awakes to the terrifying realization that the villagers have imprisoned him in a steep-sided sand pit with no means of escape. Tricked into slavery and threatened with starvation if he does not work, Junpei's only choice is to shovel the ever-encroaching sand or face an agonizing death. Among the greatest Japanese novels of the 20th century, The Woman in the Dunes combines the essence of myth, suspense, and the existential novel. And in big, bold letters at the top, a quote from Time magazine, I believe, "A haunting Kafkaesque nightmare." So every single person who's made loving Kafka their identity, pick this up. It's really good. There are definitely themes that you see in Kafka's The Trial. It covers the same themes, like issues with bureaucracy. And me at 18 was so diligent and copied out each theme that could be found in this book. So here's just a list: alienation, loss of identity, impotency, misunderstanding, submission, the transient versus the immutable, captivity versus freedom, loving confinement, and the caste system. Basically, this man is in a Sisyphean nightmare. One of the main reasons why I found reading this book kind of intolerable was because it really does not spare any of the details, physically speaking, that the constant presence of this sand has on the main characters. Let's just say sand gets everywhere. And as someone whose least favourite texture probably is sand, ugh, horrific read. And it's just mentally taxing because it's just this sense of him battling against hopelessness in this effective slavery that he's been put in. Spoilers perchance, but also trigger warning. Towards the end there is a scene with attempted sexual violence, but that being said, it is, you know, quite clearly presented in a very negative light. It is basically the disintegration of the main character's sense of self and his alignment with his captors in that moment. I could go on and on about this book. I'm so glad I actually finished it because it's so introspective and he covers so many interesting themes that I could talk about. Like the figure of the woman that the book is named after, the woman in the dunes, with whom he stays. We never get to know anything about her except how the main character sees her. She's always at his side and he's kind of fascinated by her as well. There are so many complicated emotions at play in this work. I recommend it so much. As well as The Face of Another. I've been planning on making a video about the Japanese literature that I've read. Maybe I can go in depth into The Face of Another in that video. Next, another book that I took with me because I knew one wasn't going to be enough was James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room. The blurb reads, David, a young American in 1950s Paris, is waiting for his fiancée to return from vacation in Spain. But when he meets Giovanni, a handsome Italian barman, the two men are drawn into an intense affair. After 3 months, David's fiancée returns and, denying his true nature, David rejects Giovanni for a safe future as a married man. His decision eventually brings tragedy. Full of passion, regret and longing, this story of a fated love triangle has become a landmark in gay writing, but its appeal is broader. James Baldwin caused an outrage as a black author writing about white homosexuals, yet for him the issues of race, sexuality and personal freedom were eternally intertwined. Now this was tragic. This was heartbreaking. And when you find out the tragedy, oh my god, David? Me and all my homies hate David. David did not deserve Giovanni, but that being said, all of the characters are so morally great and so realistic. I do believe that David is an incredibly unreliable narrator, and he probably was lying about a lot of things, let's be real, because the way he describes Jacques, is that how you pronounce it? They're French and I'm really bad at French. I've highlighted so much in this book, so many of these passages were just incredibly beautifully written, and it's so introspective, but the plot is so engaging. The thing is, from the beginning, Baldwin tells you, hey, Giovanni is gonna die. Oh, spoilers. Well, not really. When you find out what Giovanni did, I have not been able to stop thinking about it, basically, is what I'm saying. This is a genuinely beautiful and incredibly poignant book, and I recommend it so highly. Please, if you're interested in queer literature, in African-American literature, James Baldwin, a great place to start. That being said, the blurb does say that they were both apparently white, which I didn't realise, because it wasn't explicitly mentioned. All we were told really was that David was American, Giovanni's Italian. Giovanni's Room also really reminds me of that meme where it's like an anime girl and it's like, hey, come in, sit wherever you want, and she's among trash. If you've read it, you'll understand. Anyway, it hurt to read, but it was so spectacularly written. He just really understands humans and heartbreak and longing and also hatred. But then I read another mini classic, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, The Yellow Wallpaper, and also in this is included The Rocking Chair and Old Water, which are also short stories by her. My favourite was The Yellow Wallpaper, however Old Water was also really interesting. I'm sure most people have already read this, but this is about a 30-page short story about a woman who is already a bit mentally ill, but she was placed into this room with a horrible wallpaper, and she begins to find patterns in this, and it is her descent into what we would call madness, maybe. But to her, it's more than logical. We see a great depiction of female hysteria and how mentally ill women were treated in this, and in the fact that her husband, a doctor, basically locks her away. In this house, he doesn't allow her to see anyone, and increasingly she only wants to spend time in this room. It's really interesting, and Old Water is about the dangers of a poet, a male poet. That's all I'm gonna say. My last mini classic is Ovid's The Fall of Icarus, which I don't know why it's named that, because The Fall of Icarus takes up about 2 pages of the whole book. Despite that, it's very interesting because it kind of hops from myth to myth. I've taken a few supplementary courses from my classics department in my university, focused on like ancient Greek texts, ancient Roman texts, and also I did one on Augustus's Rule, in which we covered Ovid's work. Ovid, I love him because he was kind of really cocky. He got kicked out of Rome for writing a text basically on how to seduce people's wives specifically. I kind of just love him because every piece of his work is kind of bitchy. I don't know if that makes sense, but he's very witty in the way he writes specifically. Maybe not so much in this, because this is meant to be more of a mythical account, but generally he's quite funny. If you're at all interested in Greek mythology, this version specifically is very easy to understand, and it's quite engaging as well because it's so fast-paced. I mean, Ovid's moving from myth to myth to myth. He's just jam-packed a bunch in here. It's really interesting. It's really fun to read. Last book I didn't finish because I didn't like it that much. I hate to admit it. I don't like admitting that I didn't finish a book. For now, I'm putting this back on the shelf. It is On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Now, don't come for me, but it's, you know that post where it's like Jane Austen is just going to people's houses? This is like that, except we don't even know any of the people. Basically, Jack Kerouac was an author, and I believe also maybe perchance a poet, I don't know. But he definitely associated with poets from the Beat generation, and this is a thinly veiled book about his life. So this is the blurb. Sal Paradise, young and innocent, joins the slightly crazed Dean Moriarty on a breathless, exuberant ride back and forth across the United States. Their hedonistic search for release or fulfillment through drink, sex, drugs, and jazz becomes an exploration of personal freedom, a test of the limits of the American dream. A brilliant blend of fiction and autobiography, Jack Kerouac's exhilarating novel defined the new Beat generation. It had tremendous impact on both sides of the Atlantic and made him famous overnight. Now see, that sounds so up my alley, and I would have been so down for that, because basically Sal Paradise, our main character whose point of view this is all from, is meant to be representative of Jack Kerouac. However, Dean Moriarty, with whom he drives away with, is meant to be based off Neil Cassidy. I actually don't know much about him, my bad. I do know, however, about Allen Ginsberg. He's probably one of the most famous from the Beat generation, and he is represented by a character named Carlo Marx, which is quite funny, with whom Dean Moriarty is quite heavily implied to be having a relationship with, and Sal Paradise is really jealous. It is kind of dramatic, I do have to say, but it is all very much undertones because it's, you know, been edited and fictionalized so it can sell. We know Allen Ginsberg was gay. There's quite a lot of evidence that Jack Kerouac was too. My issue with this isn't about any of that. In fact, I would have loved if the plot centered around that, but it doesn't. They just drive back and forth and they go to people's houses and these people show up never again in the book. And they do this over and over again, and it's just tiring. There's not enough stylism in it I think for me. They're just doing things. There's not much else that's going on here. There's not much to the writing, if I'm being real. It's okay, I do have a few paragraphs highlighted, but all in all I just did not connect to any of the characters, and also it didn't help that they were like not great to women, which, like, sure, 1950s, 1940s and 50s, I guess, but still, like, that doesn't mean I have to particularly resonate with the characters or find them at all likable. I'm not saying that all characters have to be likable, but there's not enough going on in this plot to engage me without likable characters. Okay, let's move on to films now. And the reason I know about Allen Ginsberg and a little bit about Jack Kerouac already is because of a film that I rewatched this month with my partner called Kill Your Darlings. If you are at all into kind of dark academia subgenres, Kill Your Darlings was always on these movies to watch list. It stars Daniel Radcliffe and Dane DeHaan as Allen Ginsberg and Lucien Carr during the Lucien Carr murders, which happened in the 40s. Actually, yeah, a murder in 1944 draws together the great poets of the Beat generation, Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and William Burroughs. Also, yeah, Michael C. Hall is in this as William Burroughs. This is an amazing film if you've not watched it. It's one of my favourites to rewatch. It's incredibly dramatic. It features gay love and love affairs, poetry, drugs, drinking, and also a kind of insufferable and pretentious blonde man. I'm joking, I love him. Next, I watched Crash by David Cronenberg. I actually watched this with my mother by accident because I didn't realise how gratuitous it would be. Needless to say, it felt very uncomfortable. But that being said, I loved it. I loved it so much. I read the book last month and I watched the film this month. It stars my fave, James Spader, love him. Crash is basically about a guy who gets into a car crash and then gets excited by car crashes, sexually speaking. He gets stalked by a guy named Vaughn, who's even bigger of a freak than he is. It's very bisexual. They're basically one big open poly group, essentially. We get gay representation, we got straight, and we got lesbians. If you're into cars, if you're into just freaky shit, I do recommend this, but I recommend watching it in your room alone in the dark. Most of my thoughts about the plot I talked about in last month's wrap-up, but I do have to say I think it's a very good adaptation, and it really considers a lot of the things from the book. And it was able to translate that into a visual in a way that I don't think many other directors can when they're adapting from a novel. Speaking about you at Sofia Coppola, The Virgin Suicides, I also love Marie Antoinette, but it's not, The Virgin Suicides is not a good adaptation of the book. I'm sorry. This is just a side tangent, but one of the main parts of The Virgin Suicides in the book is the tense that it's written in. It's written in collective first person, like we, because it's from the point of view of these neighborhood boys who are creepy as fuck. And I just find that it's really hard to replicate that through cinema in the way that you can do that in a book. I also think that that's not really Coppola's fault or anyone's fault. I just think you can't translate something like that onto film effectively enough. Anyway, then I watched The Love Witch. I rewatched it technically. Of course I've watched it before. Who do you think I am? The Love Witch is a film made in 2016 and directed by Anna Biller, and the description reads, "A modern-day witch uses spells and magic to get men to fall in love with her with deadly consequences." Which is true. It's a soft horror. I wouldn't recommend anyone watching this or Crash if they're under the age of 18, especially Crash. There are scenes of various different types of violence. Overall, it's about a delusional woman, basically, who is searching for her Prince Charming, and she's a witch. She was reborn as a witch. The Love Witch is a cult classic amongst practitioners of witchcraft because it has quite accurate depictions of both Wiccan practices and practices common in witchcraft. It's kind of in the same category as films like The Craft or Practical Magic. It's so gorgeous and the colours are so rich. I mean, just the house alone is perfection. She has amazing makeup throughout the whole film, gorgeous wardrobe. The house itself is apparently decorated using the kind of motifs and colour themes of the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, which I actually have. I would highly recommend this for anyone into the occult, or just like gorgeous films in general, or women doing things. Then the next film I watched is in stark contrast to this one. It is Shrek 1. Now, to be honest, I don't really have much to say about this. I've seen it before. I watched it with other people. It wasn't really my choice. I wouldn't choose to watch Shrek personally, but that's just me, and I know everyone has different things that bring them nostalgia. Shrek just doesn't for me because I didn't watch it in my childhood ever. It's just quite fine to me, but I understand the appeal, like it's fun. Last film I watched is In the Mood for Love, directed by Wong Kar-wai. I actually don't know when it was released. It was released in the year 2000, and the description is: two neighbours form a strong bond after both suspect extramarital activities of their spouses. However, they agree to keep their bond platonic so as to not commit similar wrongs. You can so clearly tell that they've fallen in love. It's set in 1960s Hong Kong, and basically the two main characters live within the same apartment, but I think they share like a kitchen maybe, or like there's a communal living area, and they get to know each other because they realise that their partners are having affairs with each other, and they're like, oh no, they're heartbroken. I mean, this film is so gorgeous, and the way it's shot as well is so intimate. I mean, everything feels cramped, but intentionally, and it feels like you're intruding kind of on their budding romance that doesn't actually go anywhere ever. The character of Mrs. Chan has such an amazing wardrobe in this film. She has this very similar style of dress on. They're all cheap house, I think, though I would not trust myself with that because I'm not sure. It's so devastating when it inevitably is over, and the ending sequence, wow. I would definitely recommend this if you're looking for something incredibly romantic, incredibly intimate, but also devastating emotionally. That's the last film I watched, so onto TV shows now. I only watched one TV show, which was Blue-Eye Samurai. This is an animated show with 12 or 13 episodes on Netflix, each of which are about 40 minutes. It's not an anime. I believe it's done by a Western production company, plus it utilizes a lot of CGI in it. But I would say it's really well done. I found the plot very engaging. The plot follows Mizu, who is the Blue-Eyed Samurai, though technically she's not bound to anyone. Also, fun fact, Mizu is a woman hiding as a man. She has hid as a man all her life. And there's actually a lot of debate as to what Mizu's gender is. Though that being said, it is quite a large plot point that Mizu is hiding as a woman, if that makes sense. It's set in 17th century Japan after the Sakoku Decree, which basically shut Japan off from the outside world. And the plot follows Mizu, who is half white, half Japanese, and has very conspicuous blue eyes. And for this reason of being able to be clocked, basically, Mizu has vowed to kill all 4 of the white men who were still in Japan after the decree was put in place. There are a bunch of other side characters as well, whose plots we get to follow. Mizu is accompanied by the son of a noodle maker called Ringo, who has no hands, but he wants to learn from Mizu and become her apprentice. We also follow Akemi, who is the daughter of a famous noble, and also her lover Taigen. It's really fun, it's full of action, and it's heartbreaking at some points, to be honest, especially during, well, in an exposition scene about Mizu's past. Wow, let's not get into that. But it's basically Edo period Japan, but it's really interesting. I stumbled across it accidentally with my partner, and we had a blast watching it. I used to watch a lot of animated things when I was younger, a lot of anime as well, when I was around 16 years old. But I haven't really watched much since. It's really nice to get back into something familiar, at least along the animation line. That's been my TV show of the month. Next category is podcasts, and the only podcast I've listened to this month is Dungeons and Daddies. I've spent the last 4 months basically listening to the first 2 seasons, and I'm on to the 3rd season. Dungeons & Daddies is basically a roleplay D&D podcast. D&D stands for, of course, Dungeons & Dragons, which is a role-playing tabletop game. I actually also play Dungeons & Dragons, and I have for about a year now. I play this tiny 2-foot owlin. His name's Colin. But I was put onto this podcast by my friends who I play D&D with. Each season follows different characters, but the first season follows a set of 4 fathers who are not the best, but they're not bad, but they're not the best, and they get transported along with their sons to an alternate dimension, basically, in which they have to fight to get their sons back. And there's a lot of familial bonding, a lot of trauma, cycles of trauma, and it's heartbreaking. I have cried at this multiple times. Just try it, please. It's such a good podcast. You wouldn't expect it. You don't even have to like D&D necessarily to get it. Just the plot. listen to it. So that was quite a quick category. In terms of YouTube channels, I only have 2 to recommend. Other than that, I've been mainly watching people I've already recommended on this channel. The first one being Unsolicited Advice. He makes a lot of philosophy content and a lot of literature-based content as well, and I just find that he explains concepts in a very understandable way. I've often struggled with philosophical texts. A lot of the time the writing is quite difficult to understand, so I like watching his videos to kind of get a baseline understanding of these concepts. Despite that, I mean, I'm still trying to read some stuff, but it's just an easy way to learn. Also, I found a YouTube channel called Eternalized. They make a lot of breakdown videos regarding the philosophy of various different character types, archetypes, even just like various other concepts like UFOs or animals. I would also like to highlight some of my favourite informative YouTube videos, video essays. I will put them on screen because I haven't looked through my entire month's worth of YouTube history yet. I'll include screenshots of all of them, and I hope you check them out if one of them sparks any interest in you. These were the ones that intrigued me the most, or I thought were the most amazing or interesting to learn about. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'm so glad you stayed this long to hear me talk about my favourites. Also my not so favourites, if we're talking about Jack Kerouac's book. I love to make videos about books, art. I've done some videos on journaling, fashion. I'm planning on starting some video essays. If any of that sounds like it's up your alley, I would implore you to subscribe. I'd love to have you. If you enjoyed, please leave me a like. I always appreciate it, and I hope to see you next week. Bye!